to the World War II newspaper channel where we read the Chicago Tribune one day at a time, going through World War II as it happened through the eyes of those who lived it. If you enjoy content like this, please subscribe to this channel and click on the bell icon to get notifications when a new upload is going to premiere. And also, if you want to hear the actual newsmakers, go check out my other channel, the companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. There we have vintage broadcasts, including newscasts, speeches, old movies, and music. And subscribe to that channel and click on the bell icon. Now for the newspaper. News as read from the Chicago Tribune for Saturday, January 4th, 1941. Henry Chopper reporting. The weather today. The sun rose at 7:18 a.m. It set at 4:32 p.m. For Chicago and vicinity, partly cloudy Saturday and Sunday, snow flurries Saturday, cold waves Saturday and Saturday night, temperature 5 to 10 above, continued cold on Sunday, fresh to strong northwest winds. The low temperature 10 degrees, the high temperature 36. Today's headline. Take 5,000 in Bardia forts. Cairo, Egypt, January 3rd. Australian troops storming the Italian fortress of Bardia, Libya, already have taken more than 5,000 prisoners, a quarter of the garrison, the British command reported tonight in a special communique. The communique said merely, operations are developing successfully at Bardia. So far, more than 5,000 prisoners have been captured. Earlier dispatches from the battle zone declared that the sudden attack, led by Australians, had broken through the half-ring of forts protecting the Italian port and that the assault was continuing, supported by tanks. The thrust was preceded and supported by the heaviest aerial bombardment yet conducted in the African War, authoritative sources reported. All last night and this morning from dusk until dawn, British planes crossed and recrossed Bardia, dropping tons of explosives and incendiaries on the beleaguered Italians and starting huge fires all over the town, it was reported. Not one plane was lost in this operation, RAF headquarters said. Then at dawn, the Australians launched their drive. They reported a fairly deep penetration in the southwest sector of the semicircular Bardia defenses by noon. These defenses shelter Bardia for a distance of 17 miles from coast to coast. They are some 5 to 6 miles in depth. The Italians were asserted to have the advantage in blockhouses, concealed machine gun nests, and barbed wire entanglements, the whole network of defenses being backed by heavy artillery, including at least one big caliber naval gun mounted ashore. But the Australians crashed through on the southwest of the ring, which already had been weakened by the aerial onslaught and the almost daily pounding by air bombs and by the big guns of the British fleet offshore. An attack on these positions apparently had been considered unlikely by the Italians whose defenses had been pointed in the opposite way. From Rome, a radio report said the sacrificed garrison in Bardia holds fast in spite of every British attempt to pierce its defenses. A high command communique claimed that Italian bombers off the African coast had hit a British cruiser. Some 20,000 Italian troops have been penned up in Bardia for more than 2 weeks with their backs to the sea. It is at Bardia that the Italians have made their first real stand since the British offensive swept Marshal Rodolfo Graziani's troops back into Libya from the western Egyptian desert. Since then, the British mechanized columns have gone far beyond Bardia to raid the precincts of Tobruk, some 80 miles within Libya, and they control a segment of the Bardia-Tobruk road. There is, however, no new information about this operation. The British Air Force, hitting hard again, was reported to have started fires and explosions at Tripoli all the way across Libya in 2 heavy overnight raids on January 1st. Bombs straddled a mole where 5 cruisers were moored. Others spread flames in air and seaplane hangars, hit the customs jetty, and damaged 2 big motor vessels and at least one other ship, a communique said. The flames were reported visible for 60 miles. Bombay, India, January 3rd. The 4 Italian generals captured in Africa arrived here today under escort along with 1,000 other prisoners and will be taken to a camp in northern India. London, January 3rd. Bartle Bull, Conservative Member of Parliament and husband of the former Rosemary Bauer of Chicago, daughter of Mrs. Jacob Bauer, has been wounded in active service in the Middle East, according to reports received here today. Bull, 38 years old, married the former Mrs. Bauer in 1931, at which time she was described as the richest debutante in Chicago. Bull, a native of Toronto, attended Eton and Oxford, passed his bar examination, then managed a cattle ranch in Cuba before beginning his practice here. He has been a Conservative Member of Parliament from Enfield since 1931. He was commissioned a second lieutenant 15 months ago. He has 1 son and 1 daughter. Mrs. Bartle Bull, who is staying with her 2 children at the home of her mother, Mrs. Jacob Bauer, 1511 Astor Street, said last night that she had received word from London advising that her husband had been wounded in action. The cable did not indicate how serious the wound is, she said. Lieutenant Bull is with the famed Coldstream Guards. Mrs. Bull and the children came to Chicago in October, presumably for the duration of the war. Athens, Greece, January 4th. Greek troops broke through Italian defenses in Albania in the central sector to pave the way for what was authoritatively described early today as an important development in the war. The scene of the breaching was not located specifically, but it was understood to be north and east of Klissura Tepelini area, which a government spokesman earlier had declared was pierced by the Greeks. Gains northeast of Chimera on the coast also were chalked up by the Greeks in the drive north toward the important fascist bases of Valona on the coast and inland Barati and Elbasan. Earlier, the spokesman had declared that desperate Italian counterattacks failed to dislodge the Greeks from newly acquired heights in the Klissura region, and that Italian tanks had been put to headlong flight from that region to the Adriatic Sea. The Greeks said the Italians suffered heavy losses. The whole region of the Tepelini-Klissura line has been brought under control of Greek fire, advices from the front said. It is via the road running from Klissura through Tepelini to the west that Greek forces in central Albania aim to press on to Valona simultaneously with the southern wing advancing up the coast from Chimera. In the latter sector and in the Pogradec area south of Lake Otrida, the Greeks claimed they had repulsed enemy tank assaults and destroyed a number of machines. Heavy fighting continued, especially from the coast to Klissura, despite adverse weather. The bodies of 200 Italians were reported found on camp beds in a mountain cavern converted into a field hospital. The Greeks, who said the men apparently froze to death after being abandoned by retreating comrades, gave the victims military burial in frozen ground. In the north-central sector, Elbasan, Italian base 30 miles south of Albania's capital, Tirana, was heavily bombed Thursday by British airmen, a British communique said. 3 large fires were started, one in a big building in the center of town, the British related. A military barrack also was believed struck. The Italian High Command acknowledged a raid with some losses among the civilian population of Elbasan. Dublin, January 3rd. Prime Minister Eamon de Valera of Ireland tonight sent a stiff protest to Germany against bomb attacks attributed to Nazi planes and met with his cabinet in urgent secret session. There were rumors that any further attacks would mean the expulsion of the German minister to Ireland. This rapid series of developments followed a pre-dawn attack today by a single plane whose one explosive smashed 2 houses on Donore Avenue in Dublin and injured some 20 persons. In Berlin last night, an authorized spokesman declared that those bombs are English or they are imaginary. Then he added, our flyers are not and have not been sent to Ireland. Someone else will have to explain those bombs. Newspapers in Rome likewise attributed the bombings to the Royal Air Force. In London, neutral sources said flatly that the Germans had dropped the bombs. The Irish Department of External Affairs formally blamed the Nazis for the bombing of several other areas in neutral Ireland. Such incidents have been occurring intermittently since Wednesday night and announced an energetic protest to the German government against the violation of Irish territory by German aircraft and the loss of life and destruction of property. The Irish charge d'affaires in Berlin, it was added, have been further instructed to claim full reparations and insist that effective steps be taken to avoid a recurrence of such happenings. As to the additional bomb that fell only today, the department announced an investigation of its origin was still in progress. This afternoon, Irish soldiers fired with rifles and machine guns upon what they believed was a hostile plane over Dublin, but the government's information bureau subsequently described it as a civil plane en route from England to Dublin, which had got into difficulty. The craft had dropped flares in the historic cemetery of Glasnevin, the burial place of many an Irish revolutionary hero, and these were generally accepted at first as incendiary bombs, since the use of a flare in broad daylight is extraordinary. The cumulative list of casualties in raids from Wednesday night through today stood at 3 dead and an undetermined number, considerably above 20 injured. On Wednesday night, 5 areas within a 60-mile radius of Dublin, including a plain on which is situated headquarters for the Irish Army, were bombed in a 5-hour raid. Again on Thursday night, 3 bombs fell near Enniscorthy, County Wexford, some 60 miles to the southwest of Dublin. Then came today's pre-dawn raid. Magnetic mines also have fallen on Irish soil, these near Enniskerry, a short distance from the Irish seacoast in County Wicklow. Some British sources said that by the bombings, the Germans were trying to bring Ireland into the war on Britain's side. Should Ireland enter the conflict, these sources said, Britain would be forced to help fortify that republic and thus strain her own air, sea, and land forces. The new problems posed for the Irish government have heightened an already perplexed situation, which De Valero acknowledged in a Christmas broadcast to the United States, appealing for American aid in obtaining supplies and defensive arms. British restrictions on the re-export to Ireland of goods brought across the Atlantic under the protection of British guns have been tightened. Ireland has refused British suggestions that she allow Britain to use her western ports in convoy and anti-submarine activity. London, January 4th. Hundreds of firemen and volunteers fought desperately early today against great German set fires in 2 British towns, one in the Western Midlands, possibly Birmingham, and the other in southwest England, possibly Cardiff, Wales, or Plymouth. The assaults by German airmen hurling fire and explosive bombs began last night and appeared to have assumed the proportions early today of previous Nazi attacks on London, Cardiff, Birmingham, Coventry, and Bristol. 4 firemen and 2 soldiers were killed in the southwestern town in fighting the flames. Incendiary and high explosive bombs continued to rain down on this town until several hours after midnight, when the all-clear signal finally was given. Earlier messages from the West Midlands town said that alert civilians had saved many buildings there by extinguishing the flames before they could get a good start. Hong Kong, January 3rd. The story of how Count Felix von Luckner, again at his old job of prowling the seas for Germany, but as always a gallant, gave his victims a complaint book to keep during their captivity, was credited today to the survivors of 2 Norwegian ships, one seized, one sunk. The story came to light today through a European who said he had heard it when the Norwegians passed through Hong Kong en route home via Vladivostok. Some time ago, according to this account, the crew from a Nazi raider boarded a Norwegian ship in Sumatra waters after an exchange of fire in which 9 Norwegians were killed. The raider, at first mistaken for a peaceful merchantman, turned out to be the former British Glen liner Glengarry, 7,100 tons, seized by the Germans at Copenhagen and sent into the Pacific by a devious route. Von Luckner, the story goes, was at the helm. The 54-year-old Count addressed the survivors personally, saying that he regretted that he had the fire. Then he presented them with the complaint book and assured them it would receive his personal attention. The raider went into the Indian Ocean with the Norwegians below decks, approached another Norwegian ship and shelled and sank her, then took these survivors aboard and headed for Kobe, Japan. There, the prisoners were placed aboard the German liner Scharnhorst. Subsequently, a number of the Norwegians were released and repatriated to Norway by arrangement of the British and Norwegian consulates. The most recent exploit credited to the Glengarry, reputedly von Luckner's 1940 Sea Adler or Sea Eagle, is the sinking of the British liner Rassitane on November 26th. The ship's crew and passengers were landed on a little island near New Guinea and later rescued. It was in the Sea Adler, a made-over windjammer, that von Luckner, 24 years ago, ran the Allied blockade and made his way to the South Pacific, leaving a trail of wrecked merchantmen. In 1916 and 17, he sank more than 25 Allied ships before a tidal wave drove him on the Montpelier Island Reef while he was trying to land prisoners from the American schooner Manila. In another vessel, he got as far as the Fiji Islands, where he was captured. Cape Town, South Africa, January 3rd. The 85,000-ton Queen Elizabeth, largest liner afloat, has reached Cape Town after a leisurely 14-day voyage through the dangerous South Atlantic, the British announced today. New York, January 3rd. The British Broadcasting Corporation tonight reported the 15,105-ton French liner d'Artagnan, operating out of Indochina, had run ashore at Shanghai after being deserted by many of her crew. NBC picked up the broadcast. Chongqing, China, January 3rd. A daring raid in which a Chinese plainclothes corps was declared to have stolen into Nanking and killed more than 100 Japanese at a military post just inside the city's fortified wall was described today in a Chinese Central News Agency dispatch from South Kiangsu. The raid occurred December 22nd, the dispatch said, and the Chinese escaped after seizing 2 machine guns. Kunming, China, January 3rd. This Chinese terminus of the Burma Road was under air raid alarm for 5 hours today as Japanese dive bombers attacked an eastern suburb. Several persons were reported killed and 20 injured, but Chinese authorities said material damage was slight. Japanese planes pelted the city yesterday with leaflets urging support for the Nanking government of Wang Ching-wei and bombed points west of the city. Bangkok, Thailand, January 3rd. Minor clashes continue in various sectors of the frontier between Thailand and Indochina, the Thai High Command reported today, with hostilities extending from the Chiang Rai in the north to the Ayanyapbadis in the south. 1 French soldier was reported killed and 11 wounded in a clash in the Chiang Rai region. Indo-Chinese soldiers in a boat opened fire on frontier police near Ban Bahai in the Nong Khai region, a communique said, and a 35-minute fight ensued before the boat withdrew. New York, January 3rd. Domai, Japanese news agency, said in a broadcast that the American liner President Coolidge, with 779 passengers, arrived at Kobe, Japan today from Shanghai. Berlin, January 3rd. Germany is training and equipping an army on skis, it was revealed today. It was reported the training program was being carried out on a large scale and at a high speed in Norway. No German soldier must leave Norway before he has mastered the art of skiing. It was also reported that all branches of troops are equipped with skis, and even the Norwegians are amazed. It was declared that skiing teachers are being trained at high speed in order to be able to give lessons in their units. Berlin, January 3rd. Canada never can fill the place of the British Isles as the center of the British Empire after the war on the Isles has been ended, an authorized economic expert sought to prove today in addressing foreign correspondents. Proceeding on the assumption that the British Isles shortly will be defeated, this expert envisages the British government emigrating to Canada and the British Navy also going there. But the Army cannot go there, nor can England's population of 45 million, he said, nor can her complicated industry simply be exported. That is where the rub comes. Canada isn't at all suited as a base for continuing the war. Her potentialities are exceedingly small. She has no munition industries to speak of. The overseas Dominion is not able, he claimed, to afford proper space for the British fleet, nor has the Dominion sufficient skilled workers to care for the fleet. London, January 3rd. Britain today was stirred by revelations that British goods are being made for the Japanese army and that American war materials again are reaching Germany through Russia. Minister of Aircraft Production Lord Beaverbrook's Daily Express said there is a strong feeling that the Board of Trade will revoke the export license for goods which are being turned out in British factories for the Japanese army. Hugh Dalton, Minister of Economic Warfare, warned that valuable war materials again were being sent from America to Germany via Vladivostok, Siberia. While it was admitted that munitions are being made in Britain for Japan, it was explained that the contract was placed before the war began and the export license was issued for the goods to permit fulfillment of the contract. If the license is revoked, it was said the munitions would be turned over to the British Army. The storm over British factories making goods for Japan was brought to a head yesterday when Alfred Edwards, a Labourite member of Parliament, revealed that he had written to Prime Minister Winston Churchill demanding an explanation. Edwards said he had been informed that war workers had threatened to strike because they believed the goods they were making were intended for Japan. Some time ago, the workers protested to Labor Minister Ernest Bevin, saying they refused to work for a member of the Axis. Not a single gun or bullet should go to a potential enemy, Edwards said. The alleged excuse is that we need foreign currency. That is a disgusting excuse. Edwards' letter to Churchill threatening to raise the whole subject of Japanese supplies in Parliament and the workers' strike threat sent officials of the Ministries of Supply and Labor, the Board of Trade, and the Foreign Office into a huddle today to discuss the situation. Ottawa, Ontario, January 3rd. Diplomatic experts from Washington, D.C. and officers of the Canadian External Affairs Department are engaged in drafting a new agreement covering the entire St. Lawrence River Great Lakes Power and Navigation Project for submission to the Canadian and American governments, it was learned tonight. Previous reports of recent negotiations have stressed one stage of the $500 million project, that covering power development in the International Rapids section of the St. Lawrence River, but a spokesman for the Canadian delegates said the entire project was included in the present draft. Belief was expressed there was a possibility of an agreement within a month. A. Burrell, J.D. Hickerson, and Professor J.H. Bonebright, of the American State Department, arrived today from Washington and were joined in the committee room by J. Pierpont Moffat, American Minister to Canada. Canada was represented by J.E. Reid, Dr. Hugh Keenley-Side, Max Wershoff, and S. Scott Reid, Second Secretary in the Canadian Legislation at Washington. The Canadian Legation at Washington. Vichy, France, January 3rd. Marshal Henri Philippe Pétain was said authoritatively tonight to be still studying a reorganization of his government after a day of confusing and contradictory statements and the resignation of Paul Bedoin, a leading figure of the regime. Authorized informants characterized as premature an apparently official announcement earlier in the day that the cabinet had been reorganized with sort of a directorate taking the place of the former one-man vice-regency of Pierre Laval, ousted vice premier. The earlier announcement had indicated 2 French fighting men and a political veteran would have broad powers under Pétain. These 3 are Navy Minister Admiral Jean Darlan, 61 years old, regarded as a close collaborator of Laval and considered anti-British, War Minister Charles Hutzinger, age 60, and Foreign Minister Pierre-Etienne Flandin, age 51. It was said at the time that Darlan would be in charge of the Interior Department, Hunsinger charged with defense powers, and Flandin responsible for economic as well as foreign affairs. Such a cabinet change has been expected, but tonight officials said they did not know when it would be announced. It was indicated the Germans had been told about the plan, but it was uncertain whether they had approved. The French are awaiting Germany's reply to Pétain's note on a plan for the resumption of French-German negotiations, stalemated since Laval was pried out of power 3 weeks ago. The best information is that the reply may be anticipated within a few days, and the impression got about that it will permit some sort of an accord. Vichy, France, January 3rd. A decree giving French Indochina customs autonomy as of January 1st will be published tomorrow in the official Gazette. It was announced today. Tariffs and old ad valorem basis will apply to imports from France and Algeria as well as foreign countries. Under this arrangement, Indochina can negotiate independent agreements with other countries, beginning with the agreement now being negotiated with Japan. Berlin, January 3rd. While diplomats were conjecturing today on the nature of the conversations of Premier Bogdan Filov of Bulgaria in Vienna and on imminent developments expected in the Balkans, the German press paid increasing attention to Bulgaria. Germans commented on the nervousness in Sofia. Evidence of Bulgarian preparations against apparently threatening dangers was mentioned in the Borisen Zeitung organ of the German Armed Forces. There were reports that Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop of Germany was in Vienna conferring with Filov, but this was denied by German official quarters. Von Ribbentrop's father died this week, and he may have been detained because of the death. When pressed for information on the possibility of a trip by von Ribbentrop to southern Germany, authorized sources said that nothing could be said about the minister's trips in time of war. Germans compared Belgrade with Sofia. They said that the Yugoslav capital has the appearances of a city enjoying peacetime, while Sofia is more like a city in wartime. It is blacked out and has introduced ration lists for customers in food shops and similar restrictions. Propaganda leaflets are being showered on the Bulgarian population by different parties. The Germans said with evident satisfaction that a new magazine has been started to help the population understand the trend of the new Europe as envisioned by the authoritarian powers and the Bulgaria of tomorrow. Fort-de-France, Martinique, January 3rd. The steamship Capitaine Paul Lemerle arrived here January 1st with 1,200 Martinique soldiers returning from France and was greeted by a cheering crowd. The steamship Saint Dominique sailed for Baltimore, Maryland yesterday with a number of demobilized French soldiers whose homes are in North and South America. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. President Roosevelt today announced he is sending his most intimate friend and trusted advisor, Harry L. Hopkins, former Secretary of Commerce, as his personal representative to London, pending the appointment of a new ambassador to the Court of St. James. Hopkins, who has been living at the White House for more than a year, said that he did not know when or how he will go to London, although it was assumed he would take the transatlantic clipper to Lisbon, Portugal, and board a British plane there for London. He would not discuss his assignment. Mr. Roosevelt said that Hopkins would not be named ambassador to the British court because he is not physically strong enough for such an assignment. He added that next week he expects to name the successor to Joseph B. Kennedy, who resigned the post recently. It has been expected that the assignment will go to Norman Armour, veteran career diplomat who is now ambassador to Argentina. Hopkins would fill in the interim between Kennedy and his successor. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. For the first time since the outbreak of the War Department today reported in detail on the extent of its sales of military arms and supplies, almost all of which was resold to Great Britain. In a special report, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson, advised Congress that the Army sold $22,929,438 of surplus war material in the 12 months ended last October 15th. The equipment originally cost the government $59,853,179. The sales were negotiated as the administration launched an $18 billion program to rearm the United States. President Roosevelt ordered these sales on the ground that the arms and other supplies were not needed by the Army. The Secretary's report shows that the Army nonetheless attached a considerable value to some of its excess war material at that time. Although the report did not show Great Britain and Canada as the principal purchasers of the material, most of the various arms and supplies went to those countries. Most of the arms were sold to the United States Steel Corporation and other private concerns, which in turn resold them to the British Empire. This method of sale was employed because direct sales of arms by this government to a belligerent is forbidden. The report also disclosed details of direct sales of material to Finland, Panama, Nicaragua, and El Salvador, which were not barred from making purchases direct from the Army. The Stimson report did not mention Army aircraft, which is now in British service. This was not included in the report because Army and Navy planes were not sold either to Britain or the manufacturers. The planes were returned to the manufacturers with the understanding they would be replaced by the value in new aircraft at such time as manufacturers would be able to make the replacement. No official figures have been released on the number of planes taken from the Army and Navy under this arrangement. Representative James E. Van Zandt, Republican, Pennsylvania, estimated that 2,200 planes were taken from the Army and Navy. Few, if any, of these planes have seen action. Peking, China, January 3rd. Japanese military officials countering demands for an apology for the illegal arrest of 5 United States Marines on December 30th in a cabaret incident, charged today that the affair was precipitated by a celebrating Marine who grabbed a pipe from the mouth of a Japanese. The statement, coming from headquarters of Lieutenant General Heieo Tada, commander of the Japanese Army in North China, asserted further that all the Marines involved had been celebrating. It denied a charge by Colonel Alan H. Turnage, United States Marine commander here, that the incident was Japanese instigated. The Japanese said our highest authorities are investigating the affair, but indicated their own conclusions already had been reached. It was indicated that no reply had yet been made to Colonel Turnage. Madrid, Spain, January 3rd. Admiral William D. Leahy, new United States ambassador to France, boarded a train today for Barcelona, whence he will proceed by automobile for Vichy. Bern, Switzerland, January 3rd. A numbing cold accompanied by rain, snow, and sleet gripped southern Europe today, slowing German troop movements in Romania and thus delaying preparations for any Nazi plan to drive through the lower Balkans. Railroad transportation was put many hours behind in eastern Hungary, Romania, and northern Bulgaria. Shipping was interrupted in the Mediterranean, specifically at the ports of Gibraltar, Ceuta, and Tangier, and Spain was hit by both blizzard and coastal hurricane. European Russia reported a minimum temperature of 47 degrees below zero Fahrenheit, and in Moscow, more than 50 small fires started because of the increased demands upon heating systems. They were extinguished. London, January 3rd. Field Marshal General Erhard Milch, number 2 man of the German Air Force, has sent $100 in American money to his son-in-law, Joachim Heinrich Schlichting, a prisoner of war in Britain, the Ministry of Information announced today. The ministry pointed out that it is contrary to German currency regulations to send foreign money out of Germany and asked, has he, meaning Milch, a secret bank account in America? Vienna, January 3rd. Premier Bogdan Filhov of Bulgaria visited Professor Hans Eppinger, a physician, today and was told to return tomorrow. Dr. Eppinger is described as a specialist in internal diseases. The premier had luncheon at the Imperial Hotel with Bulgarian friends. Lyons, France, January 3rd. The whole of France today was paralyzed by the worst onslaught of cold weather and snow in 25 years. With snow from 1 to 5 feet deep delaying trains and stopping traffic in many areas from the Mediterranean to the English Channel, a blizzard whipped by a 40-mile gale was ranging in this region tonight. The storm began early today. Many deaths have been reported. The second winter offensive, coming after a cold wave at Christmas time, added to the misery and want already accentuated by war conditions and made it difficult to supply many regions with fuel and food. In Lyons, the temperature dropped to 4 degrees below zero Fahrenheit. Streetcars stopped running for almost 24 hours. Trains were from 4 to 10 hours late. No trains left here after 11 p.m. yesterday. Drifts 10 feet high blocked roads between here and Vichy and Marseille. Many persons went about on skis. Inhabitants of this region hovered over scanty fires. To the east of Lyons in the Alps region around Grenoble, 4 to 5 feet of snow were reported in many districts were isolated. Coupled with the intense cold, the river Rhone and Saône, which flow past here, were in flood condition and threatened to overflow their banks. Vichy and Clermont-Ferrand were cut off from the outside world, snowdrifts halting rail and auto traffic. The same conditions prevailed, according to reports reaching this third city of France, throughout the whole southern area of France from Toulouse to the Mediterranean coast. This correspondent had just finished a tour of the southeastern area of France, where it is usually mild in winter, but which this year is suffering from cold and lack of food and coal. Berlin, January 3rd. A new campaign to educate the population on how to act in blackouts in order to reduce the number of street accidents is being conducted in Berlin. Radio, newsreels, and press are admonishing the population to step cautiously in the blackouts and close their eyes to get accustomed to the darkness when leaving lighted houses. Berlin, January 3rd. Marshal Werner von Blomberg is vacationing in some well-known German spa, authorized sources asserted today, and reports of his arrest were said to be false. The British radio, in a broadcast heard in New York, said Thursday night that von Blomberg, one-time German Minister of War, was imprisoned in a Bavarian fortress by personal order of Adolf Hitler. The best answer we can give, these sources asserted, is the fact that von Blomberg's son commanded an honor battalion at Compiègne. It would be incompatible with an officer's honor to undertake such an assignment if his father were in prison. The reference to Compiègne apparently was to the signing of the armistice with France in the famous forest last June. Von Blomberg fell into eclipse early in 1938 after his marriage to a carpenter's daughter. The German High Command was reported displeased by the marriage, and von Blomberg immediately resigned as Secretary of War. Berlin, January 3rd. Snow drifts are crippling train service in Thuringia. Sleeping car trains, which started for South Germany last night, were returned to Berlin early today with their passengers because they could not get beyond central Germany. Soldiers and labor volunteers are clearing off the tracks. Budapest, Hungary, January 3rd. Public trial of 25 alleged Nazi plotters was started today before a special tribunal. Deputy Emil Kovacs, formerly a major in the Hungarian army, was described as the alleged ringleader of the group, which is charged with having planned to assassinate Franz Kersztes Fischer, Minister of Interior. Kersztes Fischer is credited with having prevented the Nazis from gaining power in Hungary. Burlington, New Jersey, January 3rd. Remo Campana, who last June returned his World War decorations to the Italian government, cabled this message today. His Majesty King Victor Emmanuel, Rome, Italy. I beg His Majesty to order the arrest of Mussolini for high treason against Italy and humanity. Restore peace with democratic Great Britain. Tonight, Western Union delivered a message to Campana which said, Rome advises message canceled, Italian administration will not pass. Shanghai, China, January 3rd. Alleged Japanese interference with the broadcasting of local American radio station XMHA continued tonight, jamming the station's broadcast of the full text of President Roosevelt's latest fireside address. Since a recent American protest, Japanese consular officials have repeatedly informed Americans they hope to arrange a cessation of interference. Hey guys, if you enjoy this channel, check out our companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. Over there, you will hear radio broadcasts of the newsmakers, the news reporters, and various entertainment programs, comedy, drama, horror, all kinds of fun stuff. And you will also get the #1 song every Friday that is represented on that channel as the radio programs correspond with the newspapers that you hear. Each upload premieres the same night the newspaper premieres that you are listening to right now. We even feature movie serials and classic movies on there when YouTube permits it. So swing over to the World War II Old Time Radio channel and click on that bell icon to subscribe. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well and click on that bell icon. I know you'll enjoy them. And now for national news. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. Next to the question of intervention in the European war, the gravest problem confronting the new Congress, which convened today, is the fiscal situation, debt and deficit spending, taxes, and the danger of inflation inherent in the gigantic armaments program. The broad outlines of President Roosevelt's fiscal recommendations, which will be submitted to Congress in his annual message on the State of the Union on Monday and in the budget message on Tuesday, were revealed by Senate Majority Leader Alben W. Barkley of Kentucky after a White House conference today. These recommendations include, #1, a $17 billion budget for the fiscal year beginning next July 1st, including $10 billion for national defense and aid to Great Britain. Barkley indicated that Mr. Roosevelt would request lump sum appropriations for armaments with authority for him to use his discretion in dividing war equipment between the American armed forces and Britain. The British already are negotiating orders aggregating $3 billion to be purchased by the United States and turned over to them under the President's arms lending plan. #2, federalization of the whole Social Security system, which would shoulder the entire financial burden upon the federal government and correspondingly increase its authority over the welfare of the people. Barkley indicated that both the unemployment insurance systems, now administered by the states and financed by state taxation, and the old age assistance program would be taken over entirely by the federal government under the president's recommendations. At present, the federal government matches state contributions up to $20 a month a person for old age assistance. #3, a new tax program to increase federal revenues by $1 to $2 billion a year. President Roosevelt announced yesterday a $300 million shipbuilding program to produce 200 merchantmen. Barkley indicated that President Roosevelt's controversial proposal to purchase and lend unlimited quantities of war munitions to Great Britain under a gentleman's agreement for repayment in kind or in such raw materials as tin and rubber after the war would come before Congress in connection with the regular Army and Navy appropriation bills. He suggested that the legislation simply would appropriate money for the purchase and manufacture of arms and other munitions, any part of which the president, in his discretion, could turn over to Great Britain, Greece, China, and possibly other belligerents. It will be in general terms, Barkley declared. You might say it will be both general and generous. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. With utterances and actions revolving around the question of American participation in the European war, the 77th Congress assembled and organized at noon today. At the same moment, the 76th Congress passed into history by constitutional limitation. President Roosevelt was formally notified that the new Congress had convened and was awaiting any communication he might see fit to make to it. The president replied that he would address Congress in person at 2 p.m., 1 p.m. Chicago time next Monday to submit his report on the State of the Union as requested by the Constitution. Let me make a note here. If you subscribe to the World War II old-time radio channel, you will be able to hear that State of the Union address in its entirety. We will be posting it up there. Okay, back to the news. Congress adopted a resolution providing for the official canvass of the electoral vote in the November presidential election at 1 p.m. Monday. The president will appear in the joint session of the two houses immediately after being formally proclaimed his own successor by a third term. First reference to the forthcoming battle over the president's war program was made by Representative Sam Rayburn, Democrat, Texas, upon taking the gavel in the House after being reelected its Speaker over Representative Joseph W. Martin, Jr. of Massachusetts, the Republican leader. Adverting to nonpartisan support of war measures in the World War, Rayburn said that during this Congress, I expect again to see us act with practical unanimity regardless of party. The remark was vociferously applauded, except by those who regard the Roosevelt program as one bound to involve us in the European war. The Illinois Republican delegation of 16, largest in the House except for New York's 19, was the center of much attention during the oath-taking because of the outstanding Republican gain of 6 members from that state. At a caucus preceding the session, all Republican members of the delegation were present except Representatives Noah H. Mason, 12th District. The Senate was organized in half an hour with Vice President Garner presiding. An unusual incident was the seating of William Langer, Republican, North Dakota, without prejudice to future consideration of charges filed by C.R. Very, Minot, North Dakota, and others that Langer is unworthy to represent the state. Watch out, America is the theme of a radio address on foreign policy and defense, which Philip F. La Follette, former governor of Wisconsin, will deliver over the Mutual Network from 9 to 9:15 p.m. tomorrow. He will speak from the WGN studios. La Follette, who is now practicing law in Madison, Wisconsin, was a lieutenant of the infantry in the World War. He has been an earnest advocate of keeping America out of foreign wars. Last June, in a radio speech, he urged the slogan, "Stay home and save the Americas." In October, he spoke against repeal of the arms embargo, which he described as a step towards war. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. Army and Navy officials today hailed President Roosevelt's executive order suspending the 8-hour for workers engaged on construction at defense-based sites leased from Britain in exchange for 50 World War destroyers, as a move which will give great impetus to early completion of the defensive chain, which extends from Newfoundland to British Guiana. In the requirements of the law, which would have limited work on the bases to 8 hours a day, Mr. Roosevelt found that a state of extraordinary emergency exists, which made the action desirable. The executive order was signed December 31st and made public today. The use of the phrase extraordinary emergency aroused some speculation as to whether Mr. Roosevelt is not about to extend the limited emergency he proclaimed shortly after the outbreak of the European War to an unlimited emergency. Legal authorities scouted the report on the ground that under the limited emergency, Mr. Roosevelt has all the powers he could assume by the proclamation of a full emergency, and that such a proclamation would accomplish nothing. There is no listing of the presidential powers under the limited emergency proclamation because by the proclamation, Mr. Roosevelt left the field of written powers and entered the domain of implied powers. Legal experts said that for this reason, there is no limit as to what the president might do except such as the courts, which he controls, might exercise. There was no indication that the suspension of the 8-hour day on British possessions would lead to suspensions of like character in this country. Mr. Roosevelt has repeatedly insisted that the administration will stand behind what it terms its social gains. Defense construction totaling $43 million, including two $10 million airplane plants, was announced yesterday by the War Department. In addition, Senator Edwin C. Johnson, Democrat, Colorado, said in Washington that the War Department had signed a contract with the Remington Arms Company involving $101 million for construction and operation of a small arms ammunition plant at Denver. Meanwhile, the Public Service Corporation of New Jersey announced a $28 million improvement budget for 1941. The two airplane plants, which will manufacture four-motor bombers from parts fabricated largely by the automobile industry, will be located in Fort Worth, Texas, and Tulsa, Oklahoma. Each plant will be constructed under the supervision of Army engineers. The one at Fort Worth is to be operated by the Consolidated Aircraft Corporation of San Diego, California, and the Tulsa plant will be operated by the Douglas Aircraft Corporation of Santa Monica, California. New York, January 3rd. Huge contracts for national defense construction rushed through during the final 6 months of 1940, lifted engineering construction awards for the year to the highest level on record, Engineering News Record reported today. Contracts awarded in 1940 totaled $3,987,243,000, a gain of 33% over the year before and 1% larger than the previous record established in 1929. More than $2,500 million of new engineering construction reached the contract stage in the second half of the year, Engineering News Record said. San Francisco, California, January 3rd. A mysterious gray steamship of unknown nationality and flying no flag was reported off the Alaskan coast today. A report received in marine circles here said the vessel refused to answer radio requests asking her identity and ignored light signals from passing vessels. Mariners speculated whether it might be a raider headed for the Bering Strait. The craft was described as about 400 feet long with a cutter bow, square stern, bridge amidships, and four arched cargo booms. Edinburgh, Texas, January 3rd. Two naval airmen who rode out a blinding snowstorm in an ice-weighted seaplane bomber after 5 other members of the crew bailed out, one to his death, were safe today after bringing their 13-ton plane down in shallow water. Lieutenant Murray Hansen, age 30, pilot of the bomber, and Ensign Robert B. Clark, co-pilot, set their big ship down last night on a lake described by cattlemen as a puddle of water on the nearby Santa Fe Ranch after bucking snow, ice, fog, and rain for 500 miles across rugged western Texas. It was mid-afternoon yesterday when Hansen ordered the other 5 to bail out near Big Spring, Texas, after ice began forming on the wings. The big 2-engine plane momentarily went out of control in a window-smashing storm. 4 of the 5 rode to earth with only minor injuries. W.F. Purchased 25, machinist mate of Friday Harbor, Washington, was found dead, his parachute minus its rigging. Hansen turned the plane south, flying blind, and soon ran out of the snowstorm. New York, January 3rd. The keel for the 45,000-ton battleship USS Missouri will be laid at Brooklyn Navy Yard January 6th, the Navy announced today. Plans call for completion in 1944. San Juan, Puerto Rico, January 3rd. The United States Navy's Neutrality Patrol planes are the first units to be housed in complete hangars at Isla Grande Airport. Exposed to the elements since the patrol was established in September 1939, the planes now have the most modern and biggest shelter in the earthquake and hurricane area. Hangars cover more than 2 acres each. New York, January 3rd. The American Friends of Irish Neutrality, claiming to represent some 200 Irish organizations tonight, telegraphed the German embassy in Washington a protest against the unwarranted invasion of Ireland's neutral territory. The association said it was voicing the sentiment of many millions of Americans in regarding with great concern the ruthless killing of Irish people, which has occurred within the last 2 days and which allegedly has been caused by German action. New York, January 3rd. The Association of Foreign Press Correspondents has removed from its roles 2 active members mentioned in the Dice Committee White Paper on Un-American Activities and has accepted the resignation as an associate member of Dr. Hans Borcher's German Consul General. These developments were disclosed in the association's official bulletin. Fred Kruzenstein, who had listed himself as correspondent for several Brazilian papers, was expelled. Dr. Herbert Gross, American correspondent for the Nachrichten für Außenhandel, official organ of the German Ministry of Economics, resigned under fire. Both had been charged formally with unprofessional conduct. The white paper had listed Kruzenstein as an employee of the Transocean News Agency, an organization described as as Adolf Hitler's agency for the dissemination of propaganda in foreign countries, and Gross was named as having been identified by a committee witness as an agent of the German government. In his letter of resignation, Dr. Borchers said he was leaving the organization because developments have given me the impression that there are now persistent and increasing forces at work seemingly endeavoring to turn it from its former detached course and to lead it into an attitude of definite partisanship in the present world conflict. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. The Dice Committee called on all progressive and patriotic groups today to disassociate themselves from any communist or Axis influence and asked Congress for aided legislation to stamp out subversive elements. Making these recommendations in its third annual report to Congress, the committee called the government of Stalin one of naked opportunism, conquest, and power, asserted that Hitler uses brute force, described Mussolini and the Mikado as second-rate international bandits, and then suggested that believers in democratic government separate themselves from totalitarian movements. The year-end summary included a recommendation that the committee be continued for 2 years. The committee's legislative recommendations included, number 1, legislation to bring about immediate mandatory deportation of alien spies and saboteurs. Number 2, a mandatory deportation of aliens who advocate any basic change in the form of the United States government. Number 3, legislation requiring that all employees and officials of the federal government be American citizens. Number 4, the withholding of federal funds from any educational institution which permits members of its faculty to advocate communism, fascism, or Nazism. And number 5, legislation to outlaw every political organization which is shown to be under control of a foreign government. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. Angry tempers flared among Californians soon after the convening today of the 77th Congress. In the Senate, Senator Hiram W. Johnson refused to allow Democratic Senator Sheridan Downey to escort him into the well of the chamber to be sworn in for a 5th term. In the House, Republicans from California squabbled noisily and 2 nearly came to blows. Senator Johnson explained that he regarded it as all damn nonsense that a man has to walk down the aisle on some man's arm. But it appeared that the 74-year-old Republican shoved his colleague brusquely aside before marching down the center aisle, unescorted and unsmiling, for the induction ceremony. Downey, who was escorted by Johnson at his own induction 2 years ago, asserted that he was at a loss to explain Johnson's action today. New York, January 3rd. The 3 gowns Mrs. Franklin D. Roosevelt will wear January 20th when President Roosevelt is inaugurated for a 3rd term will be wholly American, American-designed and created, and the colors of 2 of them have patriotic-sounding names. The president's wife spent 30 minutes today at a department store for final fittings. One gown is a wool creation of a new Americana shade of vermilion. Another is a White House blue crepe to be worn at the afternoon reception at the Executive Mansion, and the third, the inaugural evening gown, is of rose white satin. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. Attorney General Robert Jackson today renewed his recommendation for legislation legalizing the use of wiretapping in national defense investigations and in certain other instances. He also urged enactment of a law requiring all firearms to be registered with the federal government. In his annual report, Jackson told Congress that the demands of national defense were reflected in practically every division and bureau of the Justice Department last year and that further expansion of such activities was in prospect. Washington, D.C., January 3rd. The Federal Bureau of Investigation announced tonight that James Willard Porter, age 18, of Washington, Pennsylvania, had been taken into custody in connection with the sending of an extortion note to Betty Grable, motion picture actress. FBI agent Samuel K. McKee filed the charge of extortion in Pittsburgh against the youth, who is the son of a grocer and painter and lives with his widowed mother. The letter to Miss Grable directed that she send the money to Miss Betty Westlake, Washington, Pennsylvania. McKee said there was no such person as Betty Westlake, but there was a Mary Westlake, daughter of a school principal, who had also received anonymous letters signed the Yellow Hornet. He said Porter thought the girl's name was Betty. Without her knowledge, Porter used her name on the letter, said McKee. Porter will be arraigned in Pittsburgh tomorrow. Porter admitted, the FBI said, sending the letter to Miss Grable signed by the Yellow Hornet, demanding $2,000 in cash. They added that he also admitted sending 16 letters to 4 residents of his hometown during the last 6 months, and one of them demanding $200 and inviting the persons addressed to become a member of the Yellow Hornet organization. Benson, North Carolina, January 3rd. 4 young persons, 3 of them members of the Clayton High School basketball teams, were killed here tonight when their automobile collided with an Atlantic Coast train at a crossing. The dead were Yvonne Whitley, 16 years old, Lilburn Barnes, 16, members of a girls' team, John Arch Vinson, age 17, member of a boys' team, and James Ralph Satterfield, 18, home on vacation from Georgia Military Academy. David Satterfield, 19, brother of James, was injured. Alta, Utah, January 3rd. The body of Kenneth C. Wright, 21, of Salt Lake City, was recovered today from a snow pile where a New Year's Day avalanche buried him while he was skiing. The body was found by workmen using 40-foot-long rods. The slide that roared down Rustler's Peak missed usual skiing lanes on which an estimated 1,500 New Year's Day visitors frolicked. New York, January 3rd. Samuel Cooperman, 42-year-old president of a Madison Avenue dress shop, plunged to his death today from the 70th floor observation roof of the RCA building. His body landed on the 59th floor setback. Cooperman's employees said he had been ill and had bought tickets not only to the RCA roof, but also to that of the 102-story Empire State Building. Hollywood, California, January 3rd. Shirley Temple's older brothers, Jack, 25 years old, and George Jr., 21, made a double announcement of their engagements at a party marking the 27th wedding anniversary of Mr. and Mrs. George Temple. Gee, I'm going to have 2 new sisters-in-laws, the young screen actress remarked. Jack announced his engagement to Miss Miriam Ellsworth of Los Altos, California. They met 2 years ago at Stanford University. They plan to be married in the spring. George Jr. announced his betrothal to Miss Jacqueline Meese of Santa Monica, California. The two have been schoolmates since early childhood. George at present is attached to the aviation unit of the Marine Corps at North Island, San Diego, California. Hey guys, if you enjoy this channel, check out our companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. Over there, you will hear radio broadcasts of the newsmakers, the news reporters, and various entertainment programs, comedy, drama, horror, all kinds of fun stuff. And you will also get the #1 song every Friday that is represented on that channel as the radio programs correspond with the newspapers that you hear. Each upload premieres the same night the newspaper premieres that you are listening to right now. We even feature movie serials and classic movies on there when YouTube permits it. So swing over to the World War II Old Time Radio channel and click on that bell icon to subscribe. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well and click on that bell icon.
I know you'll enjoy them.
And now for local and regional news. More than 8,000 persons have joined the Chicago chapter of the America First Committee since offices were opened last Monday. It was announced yesterday at the headquarters, 80 East Jackson Boulevard. The Chicago chapter, organized to combat the attempts of interventionists to drag the United States into war, now has 7 subsidiary chapters within the city limits and an eighth in Hammond, Indiana. 4 have been organized on the north side, 2 on the west side, and 1 in Beverly Hills. General Thomas S. Hammond, Chicago chapter chairman, expressed pleasure at the enthusiastic response of Chicagoans. Committee officials said that they expect to welcome neighborhood organizations at the rate of 3 or 4 a day for the next month. Plans were considered yesterday for a citywide rally to be held before the end of January. Meanwhile, preparations were made to receive 10,000 new women members into the National Organization of the America First Committee in a ceremony at 9:30 o'clock this morning at headquarters in the Board of Trade building. Ms. Harriet E. Vittum, head of the Roll Call of American Women, will present a scroll to General Robert E. Wood, National Chairman of the America First Committee. This document contains the pledge of 10,000 women from 42 states and 500 towns and cities to work toward keeping the United States out of war. We have very little time, warned Ms. Vittum, resident head of the Northwestern University settlement. We may awaken any day to the news that our boys are being sent to fight in the European war. We must work fast if we are to prevent such a thing. Employees in the offices of the Chicago chapter reported yesterday a steady stream of persons who offered their services in the fight to keep the United States out of war. Several engagements were reported by the Speaker's Bureau opened to spread the doctrine of the strong defense and non-intervention. 600 members of the Citizens Keep America Out of War Committee met last night in the LaSalle Hotel to launch a campaign for 1 million signatures asking that this country keep out of the war. William J. Grace, chairman of the group, asked those present to obtain 50 signatures each to their petitions and returned them tonight to headquarters at 77 West Washington Street. He said also that the group hoped to have Senator Gerald Nye, Republican North Dakota, and the Reverend John O'Brien of Notre Dame address a rally sometime this month. Grace said 200 letters and 300 phone calls are received at headquarters daily. 127 Cook County men entered the Army yesterday as the January induction machinery went into motion at the 122nd Regiment Armory, 234 East Chicago Avenue. Only 3 men were missing from the list of 160 men notified to report. One of these was inducted in Florida, where he was on business. A second recently enlisted in the Marines. The third, a volunteer, was unaccounted for. 55 of the 157 men reporting were volunteers and the remainder draftees. In the first Cook County induction in November, only 7 of the 444 men were drafted men. Of the 157 who appeared, 30 were rejected for mental or physical disability. The remaining 127 men were sent to Fort Sheridan. A total of 2,975 men will be inducted here this month. The staff will function 5 days a week, Monday through Friday. More than half of the 2,975 men will be draftees, it was indicated. The rest will be classed as draft volunteers because they have asked that they be giving their year's training at once instead of waiting for their draft numbers to be called. 3 married men were inducted yesterday. The first policeman to be drafted is Thomas Nolan, 29 years old, 8110 Langley Avenue, who has been in the traffic division for the last 11 months. The first man, more than 35 years old, to be drafted in Cook County also was inducted. He is Jackson Hoyt, 4500 Wilcox Street, a turret lathe operator. Hoyt was born December 5, 1904. He was within 7 weeks of the maximum age limit at the time of registration on October 16th. A conference of officers decided he was eligible for induction once registered despite his age. Alexandria, Louisiana, January 3rd. The 106th Cavalry Regiment of the Illinois National Guard was moving today into Camp Livingston, the $6 million Army camp being constructed 14 miles north of Alexandria for the 32nd Division. The regiment's entire strength of 1,048 men and 61 officers is expected to be in camp by tomorrow. Included in the regiment and due for arrival tomorrow is Chicago's Black Horse Squadron of 600 enlisted men and officers. The equipment includes 600 horses, virtually all which are black, 58 motor vehicles. Lieutenant Colonel George L. Simpson of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, Assistant Chief of Staff of the 32nd Division and acting camp executive at Camp Livingston, said that quarters, mess halls, and stables for the 106th Cavalry were in readiness. Arriving today were a trainload of service and attached medical troops from Urbana, Illinois, with 7 officers, 193 enlisted men, and 50 animals aboard, and a train bearing troops F, D, and E, with 245 enlisted men and 11 officers from Springfield, Illinois. An advanced detachment of 174 men and 6 officers has been in camp for some time. Many collegians home for the holidays have applied for enlistment in the Navy Air Reserve. It was announced yesterday. Lieutenant Carl G. Olson, senior member of the Naval Reserve Air Examining Board, said, however, that only those whose chances of graduation seem slight will be accepted. Lieutenant Olson said the Navy refuses to encourage applicants to leave school and that college seniors who have enlisted are not called to duty until after graduation. The board's quota of 36 enlistments for January already has been filled, he said, and the February quota of 42 is sure to be met. The University of Chicago announced last night it would start a special course of physical conditioning for prospective soldiers January 13th. The university's Department of Physical Education will be in charge of the instruction. Eligible to attend are all students, faculty, and staff members of the university and alumni and others who expect to be called into service in the next 18 months. All but the students must pay a $2 fee. Initial registration will be limited to 100. Classes will be held in Bartlett Gymnasium. Among the subjects to be taught will be wrestling, boxing, jiu-jitsu, combat games, swimming, and first aid methods. T. Nelson Metcalf, University Director of Physical Education, said the course will be in line with one recommended by the College Physical Education Association. The Studebaker Corporation will begin work on its airplane engine construction program for national defense as soon as it receives its contract with the War Department, Harold S. Vance, chairman of the board, disclosed yesterday in South Bend, Indiana. The Studebaker program includes the construction in Chicago of a big plant employing about 4,000 skilled workers for the production of precision parts for the airplane engines. Vance explained that all the negotiations have been completed and the contract approved. It provides for $36,799,300 in plant expansion. Receipt of the contract from Washington is expected momentarily. Building of the Studebaker plant in this city will mark Chicago's first major participation in the nation's vast air defense program. However, Chicago factories have been contributing to the air defense through subcontracts. Dwight H. Green, governor-elect, took command of the state police situation yesterday by appointing his own board to handle existing vacancies and to plan a reorganization of the force. His step was considered an answer to Governor John Stell's appointment of a board to examine applicants for about 100 vacancies on recommendations from Republican members of the General Assembly. It also was considered a warning to all hopefuls that they will be wasting their time if they rush in to accept the invitation of the lame duck Democratic administration and get on the force a week before Green takes office. The immediate effect was to bring from Stell an expression of his willingness to drop his own examination plan and let the Green appointees have a free hand in the selection of all police personnel. Stell also said he would accept any recommendations for immediate action made by the Green board. Green named 5 men to advise him on police problems, including reorganization of the force and placing it on a merit basis. He announced also examinations for jobs will begin before he takes office on January 13th. The 5 are Brigadier General Thomas S. Hammond, Colonel Henry Barrett Chamberlain, Operating Director of the Chicago Crime Commission, Charles C. Fitzmaurice, former Chicago Police Commissioner, Robert L. Gordon of Urbana, Secretary of the Building Trades Council of Champaign County, and Professor E.W. Potimer of the University of Chicago. They will hold their first meeting next Tuesday. Green is expected today to name his long-delayed patronage committee. It probably will consist of 5 members who will pass on candidates for all appointments except the major ones, such as those of his cabinet members. Next Tuesday, the night before the Assembly convenes, the 2 houses of the Assembly will caucus for the nomination of officers. Springfield, Illinois, January 3rd. The State Printing Division advertised bids today preparatory to awarding a new state liquor stamp contract, replacing that formerly held by the American Decalomania Company of Chicago. The letting will be held January 9th. Governor John Stell ordered the former contract canceled December 20th on the ground it eliminated competitive bidding. He said the canceled contract was at a price of approximately 70 cents per 1,000 stamps. The New York Teachers Union, Local Number 5 of the American Federation of Teachers, which has been accused of being dominated by communist officers since 1935, was served with notice yesterday to show cause why its charter should not be revoked. The action was taken by the Executive Council of the Teachers Federation at the conclusion of a 5-day session at the University of Chicago. The New York Union, second only to the Chicago Teachers Union in membership, will be permitted to answer charges that it has engaged in tactics and practices inimical to democracy at a meeting of the Executive Council here on February 15th. The local, which has 6,500 members, is composed of elementary and high school teachers throughout New York City. New York, January 3rd. Charles J. Hendley, president of the New York Teachers Union, made an immediate reply today to the action taken in Chicago by the Executive Council of the American Federation of Teachers, demanding that the New York Local Number 5 show cause why its charter should not be revoked for practices inimical to democracy. Hendley denied all charges made by the Executive Council. He said the New York Local was one of the most democratically organized chapters of the Federation and branded as spurious and malicious the Council's accusations relating to factionalism within the local. Frank L. Marzano, candidate for Secretary and Treasurer of Local 278 of the Bartenders Union in the election to be held Monday, was reminded yesterday that he forgot to list all his qualifications in his campaign literature. Candidates opposing him recalled that he was paid $25,000 in 1 year by a liquor concern while he operated the Union School for Bartenders. Marzano is a nephew of George B. McLean, business agent of the union, who is seeking re-election. McLean is allied with James Crowley, present Secretary and Treasurer, who wants to be president. Their lawyers have informed Circuit Judge Robert Jerome Dunn, who appointed a receiver for the union, that they have made peace with Frank the Enforcer Nitti and other gangsters who, McLean once swore, controlled the union until a short time ago. A new contract between members of the American Federation of Labor Teamsters Union, Local 705, the Chicago Truck Drivers Union Unaffiliated, the Cartage Exchange of Chicago, the Illinois Motor Truck Operators, and other interstate truck owners will be ratified on Monday. The contract terms, retroactive to January 1st, were approved last night by about 2,000 members of the AFL Union, meeting in Electricians Hall, Washington Boulevard and Ogden Avenue. The contract provides for a weekly pay raise of $3 for all drivers and an increase of 10 cents in the hourly overtime rate. The drivers, all of them freight truckers, did not obtain their desired vacations with pay. Terms of the proposed contract were read to the men by Fred Teed, recently re-elected president, and arguments for approving them were advanced by H.E. Wood, Secretary-Treasurer, who was one of the negotiators. The independent union was represented during the negotiations by Thomas Conley and Patrick Lavelle, who were given permission by their fellow members to make final terms. There are 11,000 men in both unions. A former inmate of Alimony Row asserted yesterday that a wife who sends her husband to jail for alimony arrearage stigmatizes their children and does not deserve her husband's love. With that observation, the husband, Leroy Patterson, an estimator, announced that he could not return to his wife Ethel, 3958 Drexel Boulevard. He insisted that she be granted a divorce. The Petersons separated in 1937 after 19 years of marriage. They have a son, Edward, now 14 years old. A week before Christmas, Peterson was committed to jail for owing $500 in temporary alimony. He was freed 2 days before Christmas with the plea by Judge Rudolph DeSort that Norman Becker, attorney for Mrs. Peterson, that they attempt a reconciliation. Yesterday, the Petersons appeared before Judge DeSort, and Peterson's lawyer, G. Edwin Mitchell, announced that a reconciliation had failed. A wife who would send her husband to jail over alimony is not deserving of his love, Peterson said. Apart from that, my wife should have considered our son, who has been stigmatized by his father being in jail. As a result, my love for her has cooled to the point where living with her is hopeless. At this point, Judge DeSort asked the Petersons what should be done. Peterson said his solution would be a divorce. I won't contest it, he said. Judge DeSort then granted Mrs. Peterson a divorce and custody of their son. Alimony was fixed at $6 a week plus $3 a week to pay off back alimony. Peterson was not returned to jail. The Illinois Parole Board will consider the parole applications of a number of notorious Chicago bandits when it holds its hearings next week on the January docket of parole petitions. A total of 517 prisoners, 281 of them from Cook County, will appear before subcommittees in the various penal institutions to appeal for freedom. Last month, Governor John Stell's parole board ordered the release of 391 convicts, 31 of these prisoners who were serving a second prison sentence, and 14 had been given previous paroles. Martin J. Durkin, gunman and auto thief, who was sentenced to prison for 35 years in 1926 for the murder of Edward G. Shanahan, federal agent, is one of the convicts whose cases will be heard by the board next week. He has been described by the Chicago Crime Commission as a desperate killer. Burt Alexander, an aviator, in whose room at 1244 North Dearborn Street, the nude body of Gladys Benson, 38 years old, a divorcee, was found December 26th, was found sane yesterday at a hearing in the psychopathic court. He was released from custody with instructions to attend the inquest next Wednesday into the woman's death. Alexander told police she died after a drinking spree. George Anderson, 27 years old and colored, of 3218 Wabash Avenue, was held to the grand jury without bond yesterday by Judge Matthew D. Hartigan in felony court on a charge of murdering a streetcar conductor in an attempted robbery at 43rd Street and St. Lawrence Avenue on November 10th. William Custer, 43, of 10224 May Street, was the slain man. Anderson was arrested December 27th. Police said he confessed. Sheriff Thomas J. O'Brien reported yesterday that his deputies have been able to serve only 41 of the 1,380 Cook County summonses issued by the St. Clair County Circuit Court. The summonses require their presence in court Monday to answer an injunction suit against gambling brought by Attorney General Johnny Cassidy. Sheriff O'Brien said attempts had been made to serve all the summonses, but that most of the defendants had gone into hiding. Judge George L. Colici in the South State Street Court yesterday discharged 7 persons arrested Tuesday in an alleged handbook at 11 North Clark Street. He held the raid was illegal because the police did not have a warrant. Thus, the judge reversed his earlier opinion that a warrant was not necessary. Police during the day arrested 15 men in raids on 5 alleged handbooks at 25 Quincy Street, 56 West Washington Street, 308 West Van Buren Street, and 6 and 81 West Randolph Streets. A short, bespectacled, bald-headed man walked into the complaint department of the state's attorney's office yesterday, announced himself as Thomas Ralph Page, and said, "I've embezzled $6,500 from the First National Bank of Dalton. I feel awfully bad about it, and I'd like to confess." When Assistant State's Attorney Atta P. Lightfoot, who heard this statement, got over his surprise, he asked the visitor to repeat his story. Page did, and it was affirmed by an unidentified woman who accompanied him and said she was his sister. "Why did you do it?" Lightfoot asked next. "Oh, I got to shooting craps and I just couldn't stop," Page said. Page, who is 40 years old, a bachelor, and who lived at 19 East Ohio Street, started working for the Dalton Bank on July 1st, 1940. Before that, he said he worked for the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago and had operated an automobile agency which failed. He was assistant cashier of the Dalton Bank, and his salary was $125 a month, according to William Stat, the cashier. Page started manipulating the bank's Federal Reserve account last October, according to his confession, and he said it was easy to cover up his thefts. Stat said he did not know how the juggling was done, but that the accounts are being examined. "I started with little amounts and they got bigger and bigger," Page said. "Most of it I lost in crap games in a place on North Clark Street and another in Cicero. Police Commissioner Allman was given the Clark Street address and County Highway Police were given the other. Federal agents took Page before United States Commissioner Edwin K. Walker, who ordered him held on a $7,500 bond on a charge of embezzlement." The 3-year-old boy whom the Austin police found wandering about at Laramie Avenue and Huron Street at 1 a.m. yesterday wasn't as well pleased with the station as he might have been, considering that his father is a policeman. When he was shown a cell, he said, "Take me out of here. This is the place for bad men." His guards turned the lad over to St. Vincent's Orphanage, where he was joyfully retrieved some hours later by his father, policeman John Kennelly of 547 North Lockwood Avenue. Kennelly said the lad, whose name is John Jr., must have slipped away from home Thursday night and wasn't missed until daylight. John Jr. explained that he was looking for Frances, his girlfriend. A jeweler's wife and her 2 children were terrorized for an hour by 3 bandits yesterday in their home at 5122 North Kimball Avenue. The victims were Mrs. Goldie Slavin and David, 14 years old, and Marion, age 11, wife and children of S.D. Slavin, owner of jewelry stores at 4158 Madison Street and 3958 North Avenue. The gunmen, 2 of whom were masked, entered the apartment after menacing Miss Slavin, who had opened the door in response to the doorbell. They demanded jewelry. Miss Slavin said only small personal belongings were around. The robbers took a locket, earrings, and a small watch belonging to David. Then the hoodlums bound the wrists of the children and Mrs. Slavin with cord, tape, and a belt and shoved the 3 into a closet. Indianapolis, Indiana, January 3rd. An extension of D.C. Stephenson's temporary parole was granted today by Governor M. Clifford Townsend. The former Ku Klux Klan leader received a temporary parole November 30th to undergo an operation at a LaPorte hospital. He is serving a life sentence at Indiana State Prison for the murder of an Indianapolis young woman. The extension runs until January 18th, 5 days after Governor Townsend turns the governorship over to his successor, Lieutenant Governor Henry F. Schricker. Some friends of Stephenson had been predicting Townsend would pardon him. Meanwhile, the Clemency Commission, which has before it a petition for a permanent parole for Stephenson, will meet Tuesday. Elizabethtown, Illinois, January 3rd. Police Magistrate E.R. Creason of Elizabethtown awarded a judgment for wages to 2 plaintiffs in a suit against a flour spar mining company here this week while sitting in the county jail. Justice Creason was in jail for failure to pay a fine and costs of $20.60 for having been intoxicated. He sat near a raised but barred window of the jail, the court docket on his knees, and heard the evidence presented by the plaintiffs and argued by their attorney, who stood just outside the jail window. The attorney, State's Attorney Clarence E. Soward, said no change of venue had been sought because he knew of no legal restriction against holding the trial at the jail. A young woman who collapsed early yesterday in the Ansonia Hotel, 2709 Washington Boulevard, after she had registered as Nancy Miller of St. Louis, Missouri, was being treated in County Hospital last night. Physicians expressed the belief she was suffering from amnesia. The police held for questioning a man who registered in the hotel at the same time. John Sliwa and his helper removed 2 tires from their truck yesterday in the 400 block of West Superior Street. They deflated one. Sliwa picked up a hammer to remove the rim, but chose the inflated tire. His first blow burst the inner tube. The rim struck him in the head. Sliwa, who was 35 years old, was taken to Henrotin Hospital where he died. He lived at 5837 Ainsley Street. Chicago civic leaders threw their support yesterday to the Council Finance Committee in its determination to keep the 1941 city expenditures within estimated revenue. They wholeheartedly endorsed the Finance Committee recommendation that the salaries of city union employees be cut 10% to put them more in line with the pay for the same kind of jobs in private industry. The unions have threatened a strike if the salary slash is approved by the council. The recommendation for the cut was included in the budgets submitted to the city council last month. It specified, however, that the pay of no union worker be reduced below the prevailing daily union scale. This reduction, the aldermen estimate, would save $340,000 and, with other savings, would bring the city's 1941 operating budget to $54,391,785, or $2 million less than last year. Assurance that the proposed slum clearance bill would meet constitutional requirements if put to a court test was given to the City Council's Housing Subcommittee yesterday as the subcommittee held its final hearing on the measure. The plan is called the Neighborhood Redevelopment Corporation Bill and is sponsored by the Chicago Building Congress, which will have it submitted to the Illinois legislature. The bill is designed as enabling legislation permitting the creation of special corporations having power to condemn a fraction of land needed for slum clearance projects. Its aim is to facilitate the use of private capital in such projects by giving it a means of dealing with the minority holdout property owner who hinders the assembling of sites. Electric currents pass through the heads of mental patients to clear up the transmission system for brain impulses are proving a satisfactory treatment, according to a preliminary report on this new method given yesterday by Dr. Edward F. Dombrowski, managing officer of the Chicago State Hospital, 6500 Irving Park Road. The state hospital had an average population of 4,600 mentally unfit during the year. Of these, it is reported 130 of various types of malady were given the electric shock treatment during the last 6 months. Electrodes are attached to each side of the head and a current of 110 volts is passed for 30 seconds. Little is known about the electricity, said Dr. Dombrowski, but this application seems to clear up the brain. It works exceptionally well in cases of persons who won't eat, talk, or move any part of their body. A noticeable change is brought about by the first treatment, and by the time we are through with the series, most of these patients have regained their natural thought processes. The new shock method is combined at the hospital with other treatments such as insulin and metazole. The electric treatment, Dr. Dombrowski said, would be used more extensively in the future. At the Illinois State Research Hospital, the electric shock treatment is also being used, according to Dr. A. Lowe, head of the psychiatric department. This method originated in Europe in 1937 and has been in use in this country to a limited extent for about a year. While Dr. Lowe thinks the insulin treatment is better, he says the electric shock is a good treatment, easy on the patient, and not requiring much nursing care. In other institutions, experiments in the electric shock method are being made on animals and have not yet been introduced to the clinics for humans. It is felt that too little is known about the effect of passing electricity through the body. In the use of rays, for instance, it took much experimentation to devise a dosage which would be healing and at the same time not spread harm to other parts of the body. Passing electricity through the brain presents a similar problem, the search for possible harm as well as beneficial results. The human brain, it has been shown, gives off at all times a small electric charge from which states of mind can be read. It has a rhythm of its own in sleep and work. Whether a shock restores rhythm is a question for experiment. Indiana's blood test law, which went into effect last March, cut heavily into Crown Point's marriage license business in 1940. Walter Mybeck, clerk of the Lake County Circuit Court, reported yesterday. A total of 4,476 licenses were issued during the year, the lowest number in at least 16 years. There were 5,925 licenses issued in 1939 and an all-time high of 11,410 in 1937 when Crown Point was a notorious Gretna Green. Both the test requirement and the fact that I'm running this office on a business basis and not issuing licenses at all hours are responsible for the drop, Mybeck said. Under Mybeck's regime, the clerk's office is closed on Sundays and holidays, and licenses are not issued after regular closing time. Hey guys, if you enjoy this channel, check out our companion channel to this one, the World War II Old Time Radio channel. Over there, you will hear radio broadcasts of the newsmakers, the news reporters, and various entertainment programs, comedy, drama, horror, all kinds of fun stuff. And you will also get the #1 song every Friday that is represented on that channel as the radio programs correspond with the newspapers that you hear. Each upload premieres the same night the newspaper premieres that you are listening to right now. We even feature movie serials and classic movies on there when YouTube permits it. So swing over to the World War II Old Time Radio channel and click on that bell icon to subscribe. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel as well and click on that bell icon. I know you'll enjoy them. And in sports, Clementon, New Jersey, January 3rd. The National Collegiate Football Rules Committee gave the game's offense a break today with 3 major rule changes affecting substitutions, behind-the-line ball passing, and forward passes. After a 3-day committee session at the nearby Pine Valley Country Club, Chairman Walter R. Okeson of Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, announced these major changes. Number 1. Players may be substituted as many times as desired during a game. Elimination of the rule prohibiting an incoming substitute from communicating with his team until after the ball has been put into play. When substitutions are made in the last 2 minutes of play in the first or second half, the watch will be stopped as usual when the substitute comes on the field, but will be started again as soon as the substitution is completed. Number 2. The ball may be handed forward at any point behind the line of scrimmage to any player and will be treated as though it were a backward pass. Number 3, 4th down forward passes which become incomplete in the opponent's end zone will be treated as though they became incomplete on the field of play instead of being ruled touchbacks. On such plays, the ball will go to the defending team at the point where the ball was put into play instead of the 20-yard line as in the past. The committee also recommended standard numbering of players in the various positions as an aid to spectators, but said it was recognized that several years will be necessary to effect this change. Okeson said groups of colleges throughout the country would test out the standard numbering during the 1941 season, and on the basis of this research, the committee expects next year to be in a position to define what such numbering must be. The general aim of the committee, Okeson said, was to give the offense greater power without injuring the defense too much. We feel the free substitution rule will not only be a great help to the smaller colleges, but will reduce injuries still further. The rule covering substitutions in the last 2 minutes of play will prevent the present practice of coaches sending in players in an attempt to delay the game. Okeson said the second change covering handling of the ball forward would eliminate a difficult foul which officials have had to call. Any lineman, provided he comes out of the line, will be eligible to handle the ball, Okeson explained. The chairman added that in such plays, the ball must be handed rather than passed, and that both players must have a hand on the ball during the transfer. The new 4th down forward pass rule, Okeson pointed out, goes even further than the professional football rule, in that under the pro rules, the ball is given to the defensive team on the 20-yard line unless the incomplete pass was thrown from outside that line. Return of the goalpost to the goal line and widening of the goal to encourage field goal kicking, both recommended by the National Football Coaches Association, were rejected by the committee, Okeson said. He said return of the goalpost would be dangerous to the players as well as a handicap to the offensive team. The Blackhawks, with an alternate goalie, Sammy Lopresti, unholstered to stand in for injured Paul Goodman, will leave this afternoon for a 2-game road trip, which will see them engaged in a match with the Bruins in Boston tomorrow night, and another with the world champion Rangers, their softest touch to date, in New York on Tuesday. Johnny Mariucci, reported out for 10 days with injuries, appeared at practice yesterday and denied he was as badly hurt in Wednesday night's brawl game as some had believed. Mariucci will accompany the squad, and Dave McKay will not be recalled from Providence, as reported yesterday. While the team was preparing for departure yesterday, President Bill Tobin was engaged in taking statements from witnesses to the Wednesday night brawl, in which Charles Y. Freeman Jr., a spectator, was knocked cold by Giacomo Orlando, Detroit defense player who is being built up as the last of hockey's bad men. It is said that the Hawk front office feels that the Chicago hockey team in some way has been jockeyed into an apparent share of the responsibility for the behavior of Orlando and the alleged inflammatory and obscene conduct of Jack Adams, Detroit manager. In any event, the Hawk organization yesterday was left as the only principal to the ruckus, taking any action designed to prevent similar sluggings. Referee Bill Stewart submitted a report to President Frank Calder of the National Hockey League, but confined his data to an earlier outbreak involving good, clean fistic fun, inasmuch as the brawling was among the players themselves. Simultaneously, referee Bill broke into print with an interview pointing out the rights of athletes to slap down heckling spectators. Bill is said to be a little tender on this subject as a result of rather unhappy personal experiences. A year ago, he had a word battle with one of the directors of the National Hockey League who had been riding him from the box at the stadium. On last September 16th, Bill also had a painful experience of witnessing one Frankie Giordano, a Brooklyn baseball fan, pin to the turf George Magerkurth, a fellow National League baseball umpire. Of all the attitudes in the aftermath of the brawl, Bill's in refusing to have any part of something that happened after the hockey game Wednesday night is most understandable. Adams, the Detroit manager, was the first to get his say in with President Calder, it was made known yesterday. Adams, it was reported, said he called back Orlando and other players before the slugging in the fear that he, Adams, was in danger of being lynched or at least seriously harmed by the Chicago box holders. He said he did not call back Orlando alone, but the entire team. Testimony transcripts of the Hawks forwarded to Calder yesterday unloaded on manager Adams not only with charges that he had done much toward inciting a dangerous riot, but for his routine and allegedly foul language in the direction of play, all in the hearing of box holders, several of whom had taken their wives and daughters to the game. According to reports around the National League, tough but more polite players around the circuit are preparing to chill off Orlando's and Adams' ambitions to establish Giacomo as the last of hockey's bad men. Chicago's Maroons are expected to come closer to beating Marquette's basketball team in their match in the Midway Fieldhouse at 8 o'clock tonight than at any time since the Maroons last drubbed the Hilltoppers 3 years ago. Minus all his veterans except Bill Kamenich and Bill Rogers, Marquette has lost 4 games, winning 1, while Chicago's quintet has broken even. Indication that Chicago's advantage this year merely may mean a smaller margin of victory rather than defeat for Marquette lies in the fact that while Chicago has beaten Illinois Tech and North Central and lost to Georgia and Western State Teachers in Kalamazoo, Marquette has faced stiffer opposition all the way, breaking even with Wisconsin and losing to Creighton, Nebraska, and Illinois. Captain Joe Stampf, who scored 23 points against Western State, leads the Maroon attack. Northwestern's basketball team will endeavor to extend its victory string to 3 when it meets Princeton in Evanston High School Gymnasium tonight. Tickets are still available and will be on sale at the box office. The Tigers, coached by Franklin Kappen, former Michigan coach, opened their tour with a victory over Ohio State, followed by a triumph over Michigan. Wisconsin administered the first setback to the Eastern Five, 52-40 Tuesday night. Leading Princeton scorer is Charles Winston of Joliet, who led the attack against Wisconsin with 13 points on 6 field goals and a free throw. 2 other members of the starting 5 are from the Central States. Dan Carmichael, captain and forward, hails from Columbus, Ohio, And Dewey Bartlett, guard, comes from Marietta, Ohio. Iowa City, Iowa, January 3rd. Iowa's undefeated basketball team, appearing a bit ragged after a 10-day layoff, rang up its sixth consecutive non-conference victory tonight with a 45-35 triumph over DePaul before 1,800 fans. The basket shooting of three forwards, Captain Vic Siegel, Tom Chapman, and Ben Trickey, put the Hawks into an early lead, and they had an easy time of it most of the way. Coach Raleigh Williams used three complete teams. Moss Biggs, towering center, and Joe Pruitt, guard, led the visitors' attack with 9 points each. Siegel walked away with the top-scoring honors with 13. Steve Mamikos, Washington, D.C. fighter, will open drills in Trafton's Gymnasium this afternoon for a 10-round non-title bout with Tony Zale, middleweight champion, in Chicago Stadium next Friday. At the same time, Zale, who stopped Tony Ciancola Martin in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, New Year's Day, will return to action with light loosening up exercises. Mamakos will be making his first appearance since beating Milt Aron in the Coliseum last November 25th. Jimmy and Billy Pierce, fighting brothers of West Allis, Wisconsin, will appear in two matches in Marigold Gardens Monday, the former in a 5-round event against Tito Taylor and Bill in a 4-rounder against Leif Erikson. Matt Milovich, Milwaukee featherweight, is paired with Andy Canal in an additional 4-rounder on the program, which is topped by a 10-round contest with Mike Gamir, Cleveland, Ohio lightweight, and Jimmy Ty of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Los Angeles, California, January 3rd. George Halas, owner-coach of the Chicago Bears, had an excellent day today, according to his physician, Dr. Vern C. Hunt. Halas underwent an operation for appendicitis December 22nd. Dr. Hunt said if Halas continues to improve as he has during the last few days, I should think he will leave the hospital by the middle of next week, possibly a little later. Yesterday it was reported Halas would leave the hospital on Sunday. Some of the fat boys among James Dyke's 1941 White Sox ensemble have been ordered to submit themselves to a streamlining process in the advance of the impending training trip to Pasadena, California, following a suggestion made by Professor Dyke's Vice President Harry Grabiner. Announced yesterday that Eddie Smith, the lefty, and two regular fly chasers, Julius Solters and Taft Wright, were about to be informed that plans had been completed for them to visit Hot Springs, Arkansas, about the 1st of next month. They'll be ordered to take the baths, climb the hills, and otherwise conduct themselves after the fashion of fellows really worried about their weight. There'll be no club policemen present to keep tab on their activities, but if, after 3 weeks at the spa, they turn up in camp without allowing shrunken waistlines, they'll hear plenty from their boss. Smith's inclination toward a keg shape has been a disturbing factor for Dykes for more than a year. At camp last spring, Smith, despite his Santa Claus contour, didn't feel much like stretching his muscles. The manager spoke harshly several times, but little Smitty settled back in his easy chair as soon as the boss's eyes were turned. Eventually, Dykes whispered to Gabby members of the party that Smith would either get to work or get out of camp. Smitty went to work immediately and kept himself in passable shape throughout the season. 3 weeks of preliminary work before going to camp and trying to get into condition in a few days might prove soothing for Solter's famous Charlie horse, which acted up at various times last season. Shredding poundage will lighten the load on the bothersome leg, and the long preparatory season, if not forced, may strengthen the weak spot. A few less pounds for Wright might make it simpler for him to move around in the outfield. Another White Sox development yesterday was the removal of Thornton lefty Lee from a possible holdout role. He returned his first contract, explaining that there was something wrong with the figures behind the dollar sign. Grabiner talked on the phone yesterday with the pitcher, who is running his auto camp at Phoenix, Arizona, and terms were agreed upon. The Sox signed list now totals 19. Those outside the fold include Smith, Clint Brown, Larry Rosenthal, Dario Laggiani, Jimmy Webb, and Bill Knickerbocker. The three coaches, Monty Stratton, Mule Haas, Harold Rule, and Dr. Ed Schacht, also have signed. New York, January 3rd. The New York Giants today announced that Hy Vandenberg, right-handed pitcher, has been sold to the St. Louis Cardinals. The deal is understood to be part of the transaction, which a month ago brought Bob Bauman, also a right-hander from St. Louis, to New York. In its original form, the Bauman deal was to have sent Vandenberg to the Cardinals' Rochester farm, but Commissioner K.M. Landis ruled this out. New York, January 3rd. Byron Clark Jr., lawyer for the Colonel Jacob Rupert heirs and trustees of the estate, said today he had no plans for a conference with James A. Farley concerning the purchase of the New York Yankees baseball empire. I haven't seen or heard from Farley for more than a month, and then it was just informally for a few minutes, said Clark. I didn't even know he was leaving the city until somebody told me what was in the World Telegram today. The World Telegram said Farley would make Clark a formal offer before leaving on January 9th on a business trip to South America. Hollywood, California, January 3rd. Tom Harmon, Michigan halfback, took a screen test today at Warner Brothers Studio, and director Ralph Murphy said he might be offered a part in Las Vegas Heights. The test will be run on Monday. Saturday night is movie night. Let's see what is playing at the downtown Chicago movie theaters. At the Chicago Theater at Randolph and Michigan. State and Randolph. It's at State and Randolph. Hurry, The Furore Lasts 6 Days More. Jack Benny and Fred Allen in Love Thy Neighbor. Paramount's Fun Fest with Mary Martin and Rochester. And on the stage, the Gay Revels of 1941. Tamara, Aaron, and Broderick, Harrison and Fisher, Bob Bromley marionettes, Walter Dare Wall, and a ballet. And at the Oriental Theater, Randolph near State Streets, in person, it's the Mills Brothers, 4 famous boys and a guitar. And in person, it's Thurston's Mysteries of India and a company of 20. Also on the stage, Milton Douglas and Company, Dennett and Day, and extra musical highlights. And on the screen, Merry Musical Romance, One Night in the Tropics with Alan Jones, Nancy Kelly, Robert Cummings, and Mary Boland. And at the State Lake, Triple Thrill Stage and Screen Smash plus Big Vaudeville. In person, we have Fats Waller and his Boogie Woogie Orchestra. And the Big Vaudeville is Grace McDonald, Wesson Brothers, Kitty Murray, Reynolds and White, Kay Perry, and Gordon's Racketeers. And on the screen in its first loop run, it's Nick Carter Smashes Murder Mystery and Sky Murder with Walter Pidgeon and Donald Meek and Joyce Compton. By the way, let me give you a quick reminder about the World War II old-time radio channel. We do feature vintage films on there, and some of the movies that are featured in these movie listings are featured on that channel if you want to take a look for them on there. At the McVickers, Madison near State Street, it's 2 hits. Cary Grant in The Howards of Virginia with Martha Scott and Alan Marshall. And it's Myrna Loy, Melvin Douglas in The Third Finger Left Hand with Lee Bauman. And at the Apollo, love forged in a tempest of untamed human passions. Courageous hearts swept by the might of their daring drama into a third loop week. It's Wesley Ruggles in Arizona with Gene Arthur and William Holden. With an extra, Pete Smith Howell with Wedding Bills. And at the United Artists, Randolph at Dearborn Streets, the spark they lit in Boomtown is a 4-alarm blaze now. It's Clark Gable and Hedy Lamarr in Comrade X, MGM's Romantic Riot with Oscar Homolka and Felix Bressart and Eve Arden. Oh, our Miss Brooks, Eve Arden. An extra, the latest March of Time, Labor and Defense, 1941, Disney color cartoon, and the latest news. And at the Garrick, Randolph near Clark Streets, it's Nelson Eddy and Jeanette MacDonald in Bittersweet with Ian Hunter and George Sanders. And extra, Raggedy Ann in Technicolor. At the Roosevelt State near Washington Streets, a thrill feast for the eye and heart. Alexander Korda presents The Thief of Baghdad, released by United Artists in Technicolor with Conrad Veidt, Sabu, June Duprez, and John Justin in its third week. At the RKO Palace, we have Ginger Rogers and Kitty Foyle, and it's Christopher Morley's sensational bestseller, plus newest thriller, The Saint in Palm Springs. It's a pretty good double feature there. And at the Monroe, Girls Under 21 with Rochelle Hudson and Bruce Cabot. And also we have Richard Dix and Wendy Berry and Edmund Lowe in Men Against the Sky. The Monroe is at Monroe and Dearborn Streets. And at the Clark, we have, at Clark and Madison, we have Give Us Wings with the Dead End Kids and Wallace Ford. And then we have a second feature, Marjorie Rambeau and Tugboat Annie Sails Again. The Telenews at State and Randolph Streets, the Newsreel Theater. The most interesting show in Chicago, 1 hour program of news and shorts. At the LaSalle advanced showing, Joyce Compton, I Take This Oath. And then Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland and Strike Up the Band with Paul Whiteman. And at the studio, Van Buren and Michigan. In its third week, we have the Mannerheim Line, spoken in English. And at the Woods Theater, Randolph at Dearborn Streets. By the way, we have this exact double feature on the other channel, the old World War II Old Time Radio channel. If you want to see both of these programs in one video, I have them set up there. And at the Woods, Randolph at Dearborn Streets, first exclusive Chicago showing, double mystery show, Sherlock Holmes, Murder at the Baskervilles, and Edgar Wallace's Chamber of Horrors. And at the World Playhouse, 410 South Michigan Avenue, in its second week, Romance of a Love Song. It's Schubert's Serenade. Here, Rosamund Ballet. Moment Musical Serenade. Bernard Lancret as Franz Schubert. Lillian Harvey, Louis Joubert. Charming film, the most pleasing Schubert I have seen, says Matinee of the Tribune. And that is movies playing at the downtown Chicago movie theaters. This is Henry Chop reporting, and that is the news for Saturday, January 4th, 1941. Have a swell day. Oh, let me give you one last note before I sign off. There was no newspaper for Sunday, January 5th, so there will not be a newspaper with the next Old Time Radio upload or the next date here. So you will have to wait a little while for the next one to come out until, well, you'll have to wait a little bit. So, but we will get it out to you for Monday, January 6th. I'm sorry about that. Somebody must have taken the newspaper to line their bird cage with, and or wrap their fish with, or whatever they decided to do with the newspaper. But it is not here in the collection, so that's just the way it is. All right, well, that's the news. Good night. God bless.